Errors and inconsistencies in a public list of political appointees are raising concerns over the data's reliability. A new analysis of the so-called PLUM book from the Government Accountability Office finds that the list of federal executives does not contain all data required by statute. It's also missing key information across several agencies and senior-level positions. Here with the details is Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
All right. Some of us are old enough to have formerly had a copy of the PLUM book on our desk. But for people who might not know, what is the PLUM book? What is it supposed to do?
This is something that, yes, as you've alluded to, has been around for quite some time and used to be in paper or physical copies. But more recently, it's moved to an online or digital format. The PLUM book, if you just, look at it from the broad picture perspective, is essentially a roster or a list of all political appointees and senior level executives who are working across government. It details, their pay rates, what agency they're working for, whether there's someone actually in that role to start with. And this covers every federal position that's either or that's appointed by the president, Senate confirmed, or part of the senior executive service. This has been routinely published, at least dating back to the Eisenhower administration. But for a long time, this list has kind of come under question because it was updated so infrequently that it was really quickly out of date. For a long time, it was only required to have updates every 4 years. So essentially once per presidential administration. That means if there's any amount of political appointee turnover, it's going to be out of date pretty quickly there. So back in 2022, Congress passed the PLUM Act, which required the Office of Personnel Management to digitize the PLUM book, update it at least once per year, and to try to essentially make it a little bit more transparent, reliable, and up to date with the information that it provides.
How does OPM gather all of that data and keep track of the turnover?
So it relies on this digital system called the Executive and Schedule C system, or ESCS, if you want to use the government's acronym there. And what they do is they have agencies fill in their political appointees and other positions into that system, and then OPM can take that collected data and report it out on the PLUM book. So the most recent iteration that we saw of this online was last summer, so around June or July 2025. So essentially what you're looking at if you go to the PLUM book website is what OPM describes as a snapshot in time. Any political appointees who might have moved in or out since then, or it isn't up to date, so to speak, in that sense. But if you go back to the actual data system that OPM relies on, that means that if there's any lack of reporting from an agency or there's anything inaccurate that comes in from an agency, that's of course going to be reflected in what you actually see in the PLUM book's end result.
Well, and now GAO has done a deep dive into this and says there is a lot of missing or inaccurate data. Tell us about GAO's headlines.
So what GAO found in their report was that there are at least 7 federal entities, so that can be an agency or a subcomponent, as well as 130 political appointees who are Senate confirmed that are missing, that are not listed in the latest version of the PLUM book. Out of more than 10,000 total entries in the list, GAO found either inconsistent or inaccurate information in more than 600 listings. So GAO says there's, those can range in anything from duplicative listings to spelling errors to, maybe it says on the PLUM book that something is vacant, but if you check the agency's website, it says that's filled. So there's a lot of inconsistencies, you can say, around this data here.
Well, this administration is maybe notorious is not the right word, but I'll use it, for dual hatting or giving people multiple assignments. Does that come through in this data?
So it should, if you look at what is supposed to be reported and how it should look if you have, for example, a position or a person who's filling 2 positions, that can and should be listed in the PLUM book, and not necessarily. It might not necessarily be listed if there are some of these outdated factors here, but that's certainly something that could be feasibly if they wanted to.
What did GAO recommend to address some of the data problems?
So they want OPM to do a lot of different things, and to be fair, OPM is already starting progress on getting some of this done. But what GAO recommended was that OPM should essentially create a system to help them make sure that the data is up to date, have better communication with agencies, and train them better on how to input their data into that ESCS system, just to make sure that that on the tail end is more accurate. They also need to do a couple other things to make sure that they're complying with federal statute, including listing on the website in a visible area where there are any data limitations, also engaging with stakeholders before they release the new data. And then one thing that OPM is trying to do is essentially try to, comply with a lot of these recommendations and moving forward. I think they said that they essentially concur with what the GAO is telling them to do here and, trying to get more accurate information out there.
Even with all of that work in the background, this is still only going to be a snapshot once a year, right?
That seems to be the pace that OPM is on right now. So it's, not clear. I think we would probably then see something this summer as an update. But if you look at some of OPM's other data sources, like their new federal workforce data website, which replaced what was previously called FedScope, that data is being updated once a month. So there is space for OPM to potentially, try to make this a little bit more accurate, more up to date. It's not something that they've specifically flagged as a priority or a goal of theirs for the PLUM book, but it is something where they do have clearly a data team who is working on some of these projects.
If a member of the general public wants to write to someone who might be listed in the PLUM book, what other sources of data do they have? I guess they can go to the agency's website directly.
The agency's direct website is probably going to be a good source for anyone who's looking for a specific person. Again, a lot of the data in the PLUM book, it might be accurate, it might be a little bit outdated, so it's hard to say. They also, I don't believe, list direct contact information on the PLUM book, but they do give a lot of detailed information around what that person's pay scale is and where exactly they're seated and what they're responsible for. So there's good information there, but not necessarily entirely laid out.
Well, it's at least good to see that there's some movement forward on the transparent personnel data. So, Drew, thank you so much for the story.
Of course.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman, and you can find her full story at federalnewsnetwork.com.